back. Let's start at the beginning. Where did it all start for you?
Okay, so I started my career studying at the then Pentec, which is now the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and part of the course was a an internship, which I was lucky enough to get in Johannesburg, of all places. And I spent a year at the Star newspaper. I stayed for a year. They wanted me to stay on, but I wanted to finish my course. And then I went about the business trying to get freelance work in Cape Town. There was community newspapers that I worked on. And then one day, as a bit of a fluke, I heard what sounded like an explosion, grabbed my camera and ran towards where I thought the noise had emanated from. And what I found in my neighborhood called Woodstock, very close to the CBD, is a car. It was a car that was burning, and it was during this time of urban terrorism, so-called urban terrorism in Cape Town. And I was the only guy who got pictures while the car was still alight, outside the police station. Quite
Mm.
dramatic. I then ran into a very famous photojournalist called Benny Gould, and I told him I've
Mm.
got these
I recall
images.
the name. Yes. Yes.
So he said to me, keep it, don't give it to anybody else. What do I owe you? So I said, I don't want any money. I want a job. And true to his word, I started getting shifts at the Cape Times until I was employed permanently. And that's how it really started for me, in mainstream journalism.
Well, certainly, and obviously that was sometimes we all say that these things happen just by accident and rather by design. And I think this is the case with many people that I've been talking to in paying tribute to broadcasters, where they say it's by accident they went for one thing and something else materializes as well. But Alhamdulillah, and then looking at your journey from there onwards, take us through that journey, Fasant.
Look, I eventually became the crime reporter for the Cape Times, which is one of the older newspapers in South Africa, not only Cape Town. And because I was breaking a lot of stories there, I was approached by the then E News team. E News live at 7. I don't know if you recall. And
Yes, yes, yes.
my name became synonymous with Gasant Abarder, E News Cape Town. People still say that little rhyme. It's quite funny, but I feel quite honored that they still remember. But I
Right, right,
remember
right.
feeling very uncomfortable in my own skin as a broadcaster, because during those early years, the late 90s, early 2000s, we needed to sound a certain way to be on radio. Our authentic, I had a Cape Flats accent, and my stories just weren't making the bulletins. And then they sent me to the voice clinic. And as a result, I had my Cape Flats accent kind of beaten out of me. And it was a very memorable time for me, spending a bit of time in TV. From there, I went to the SABC and I covered the 2004 elections, both here in South Africa and in Namibia. And then brother Muhsin Williams came knocking on the door,
Yes,
also a
I
very
recall. Yeah.
well-known journalist in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in Johannesburg, but he's based in Cape Town. I mean, he lives in Johannesburg, but he's from Cape Town. And
Yes.
the independent newspapers group at the time, it was 2005, had a new project called the Daily Voice. Now, I must pause here because this is a area where I got into a bit of trouble with my own Muslim community and the aunties because, as you know, like all tabloid newspapers, the Daily Voice was a little bit naughty, you know? And
Yes.
that's a euphemism. But Muhsin said to me, you know what, Hassan, this is your training ground for bigger things. So what they were doing with me was preparing me for a career later on as an editor of newspapers. So they said, use the Daily Voice as your kind of area to make mistakes and to learn from them, and then graduate to the more serious newspapers. And that's exactly what happened. So after spending 4 years at the Daily Voice, I was appointed, Alhamdulillah, it was a childhood dream of mine. You know, it was the paper I grew up with. I was appointed editor of the Cape Argus. And this was a time when it was owned by the Irish independent newspaper group. And I was only the third black editor, so to speak. And after Muhsin, the only second Muslim editor of this paper that was 157 years old, approaching 160 years old, like one of the oldest newspapers in the country. So it was quite a prestigious time for me. I spent a few years as editor of the Cape Argus, and in 2013, I decided that I wanted to branch out into multimedia, and I saw EWN, Eyewitness News, where our brother Yusuf Abramji was synonymous with starting and being involved in. And there I learned my craft in multimedia journalism, very dynamic space. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy the culture there. And I think my love for newspapers brought me back when Dr. Iqbal Survey became in charge of independent media. And then I was appointed editor of the Cape Times, and 2 years later, editor of the Cape Argus. So that's been my journey in a nutshell. I spent 2 years in corporate side of media as well. But it's all culminated in a book now that I've written called Hack with a Grenade. And it talks about the journey and the people I've met along the way, telling a South African story through the eyes of the people that I encountered in my journey as a journalist and then an editor.
Well, certainly now, obviously, Hassan, I can see your passion for print media. And when one talks about print media, when one looks at print media and how it has evolved over a period of time, particularly looking at it in this digital age, where we know that many people still prefer that good old-fashioned newspaper in their hands, the rustling of the paper and reading the ads and from cover to cover, and people like it sitting on the stoop with a cup of coffee or a cigarette in hand, whatever it is at the end of the day. But a lot of people, the old school, still love it because that is what they grew up with as far as newspapers are concerned. And just to looking at print media and where does print media stand at this point in time against what we see happening now? A lot of information, news on the internet, real-time news coming through, social media and the like.
Firstly, let me apologize to your listeners and your viewers for the sound in the background. I've got a 3-year-old toddler who's not very easy to keep quiet. So apologies for that. But I also
Well,
want to say
he's not a stalwart like you.
It's a she actually, but she's
Oh, she.
three going on 13.
No,
So the idea,
alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
so newspapers, I think they missed the trick, and I wish I could agree with you when you say that there's a lot of people who still want that physical newspaper in their hands. So I always use the analogy, and it's cliche. Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? If I go onto Twitter now, I get all the breaking news that I need. So newspapers can't afford to break news anymore. They need to move to a different space where they're giving depth and analysis and understanding and meaning. So if we look at the events that happened over the weekend and late last week at Sheikh in Palestine, in East Jerusalem, I don't want to call it evictions. They were illegal invasions of people's homes. Newspapers need to give people understanding and context on why we don't call it clashes. They're not clashes. They're unprovoked attacks on peaceful worshippers, And that's where newspapers come in. We hear the shorthand on the radio news, we pick it up on Twitter, but if I want to learn about this thing, and if I want context and understanding, that's what newspapers need to give me. Unfortunately, newspapers have disinvested in journalism. So we're seeing more junior newsrooms, the kind of greybeards, no offense to you, but the greybeards we affectionately call as the experienced journalists. They're no longer there, you know? So a lot of the stuff is in newspapers, unfortunately, is yesterday's news that I've already seen on social media. And so as a result, and this happened before COVID, as a result, newspapers are losing a lot of ground. I'll be surprised if many of them survive the COVID-19 thing, lockdown, which will be a huge tragedy for democracy. Because if you look into history, it was the newspapers who did the big investigations, you know, who brought down governments, who broke the scandals. And in the 90s, there was an opportunity for newspapers to turn things around. When the going was good, they were getting all the big retailers to advertise, and radio was still battling with newspapers for that same spend, advertising spend.
Mm,
The newspapers thought that they would never run out of ink or paper. Unfortunately, that day has arrived now. And so
mm, mm, mm.
people don't want to pay for their news. And it's a tragedy because journalists put their lives in harm's way to get you the news. How do we find out about the happenings in Palestine? Not through the Western media. We know that they've got their own narrative.
Exactly.
The
Yes, yes,
brave
yes.
young men and women who put their bodies on the line and their lives on the line to bring us the true story of how Israeli soldiers invaded a mosque, one of the most sacred mosques in our faith. And if that's not a crime against humanity, I don't know what is, you know? So we're getting
Hmm.
important for us to have those alternative voices, the authentic voices, and not a Western view on how Africa should be reported. You know, it's a problem that we're using foreign agencies to report on Africa instead of using Africans to report on African issues, you know?
Exactly. And I suppose, for someone like yourself, as the editor, and you pick, all of this up, when you are going through, and obviously in terms of doing what you need to do in terms of editing and what goes in and what stays in the paper and how it goes in. But just looking at the future of newspapers, as you said, the signs are not good. I suppose this is not only a South African problem, this is a worldwide trend at this point in time where newspapers are in danger.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And I want to use the example of the London Evening Standard. So if you on Oxford Street taking the tube in London, in central London, and it's peak time, you know, everybody's going home, you get handed a copy of the Evening Standard for free. It's a quality newspaper like the Star or the Sunday
Mm,
Times, but it's a free newspaper. And what they did there was they had a captive market of 600,000 tube commuters who gets this paper for free, which means they get eyeballs for their advertisers. And that's how they generated revenue. But the owners, it's Arab owned, by the way, the owners pumped the money back into quality journalism. So
mm.
that kind of innovation needs to happen for newspapers to survive. Unfortunately, for a lot of newspapers, we've missed that boat. I was agitating when I was at the Argus to do the same thing. With the same number of commuters on the Cape Town trains, for example, we could get away with the same thing. And
Yes,
it is proven because the community newspapers in Cape Town, there are about 15 titles linked to African community media, which is a subsidiary of independent media. They're thriving at the moment because these free newspapers, community newspapers, get put into people's hands, you know, and
exactly. Mm,
guaranteed eyeballs on your advertising. And that's just one example, but it's one of the example models that we can follow, you know. But South Africans are not prepared to pay for news, you know. In other countries it works. But if you weigh up the price of a bread and a 2 liter milk and news, a lot of people are going to see the news as the less important item on their shopping list, you know?
exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
And that's
But I think what you're
unfortunately the
saying,
reality that
obviously,
the media faces at the moment.
yeah, but what you're saying is very true about community-based papers because we see it right across here as well in terms of them being given out for free. But when one looks at the advertising and the quality of the advertising, and some of it is really top-notch advertising, glossy. And when you look at the companies that advertise, I mean, these are your major retail outlets, the corporates. These are the people that are advertising. So, again, the point that you made in terms of Cape Town, a major paper in Cape Town, handing it out at a train station. We see it at the airports. We see the star being handed out at our local airports, and we've seen it for quite a while now. So, again, like you said, it requires a different mindset. It requires some innovation to make sure that, you get the best out of the newspaper, even under these difficult times, Hassan.
No, absolutely, and platforms like your platform. I do some work with your sister station, Radio 786, every Sunday morning. Alhamdulillah, it's called the Breakfast Club, and I can tell you, thousands upon thousands of people are listening to me and you at the moment on Salam Media. Alhamdulillah.
Mm.
Not only because it's Ramadan, it's because we're tackling issues, you tackling issues that are relevant to them, you know? You're talking to them in their own language about issues that affect them directly. And that is the answer, hyperlocal content for audiences that choose the content they want to consume, you know? I don't want to be beaten over the head every day on the front page of the Star about a story about murder. Imagine 5 days a week you served up murder and mayhem, you know. But if we can share, here's a little bit of content about that about dawah, for example. Here's a little bit of content about cooking. Yes, here's the news with all its warts and all, but we're also giving you sport. We're giving you a bit of light, entertainment, nasikhas, all of those things, you know. And that's why community media is the answer, you know, and for a long time has been the answer. You have more listeners than a commercial radio station. You'll find in many cases.
Well, Hassan, I must say it's been fascinating talking with you and obviously tapping in on your knowledge, on your experience, on your passion and your growth as well. But at the same time, paying tribute to you. And in fact, Allah keep you strong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you the ability to achieve a lot more than what you have already achieved. And also at the same time, we request you to make dua for us. Possibly we may have a few hours, maybe a little time of the month of Ramadan, depending on the sighting of the moon, or obviously tomorrow. But whatever is left of the month of Ramadan as well, we wish you well. And also for Eid Mubarak to you. And I don't know, in the Cape Flats, what's it? Something about what? Labarang? Is it about Labarang in the Cape Flats
Yeah.
language?
It's known as Labarang, yeah. And people say slamat to each other.
Okay.
But we also,
Slamat, slamat for Labarang. Slamat for
as we've
Labarang.
gone, as we've gone posher, we also now saying Eid Mubarak, and we refer to it as Eid. You know, as we've moved
Well,
from the
inshallah.
Cape Flats to suburbs. But just to say, you guys have an amazing platform and opportunities, and just to wish you and your listeners and your viewers a blessed Eid and Eid Mubarak. Keep on doing the good work you're doing, and it's a very sad time for me because I always feel very sad when we say goodbye to this month, you know, where we had a chance to
Exactly.
introspect and to step back and to think of those less fortunate than ourselves. And my only dua, inshallah, is that Allah grants us the ability to continue with this kind of ibadah, you know, outside of Ramadan. Not just making namaz, fasting, but also thinking about our fellow human with
Mm.
charity and kindness, and may Allah put light in our hearts.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Shukran,
Ameen for
Inayet.
that. Afwan to you as well, Hassan. All the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
That was media stalwart in former Cape Argus editor Gasant Abarder, who joined us this afternoon, and we pay tribute to him in our series, season 2, tributes to Muslim broadcasters and journalists. The time is just gone 4 minutes past 5. We're going to go for a break.